Welcome everyone to Raise the Roof. Today, my co-host Leroy Hill and I offer a biblically sound and philosophically robust discussion of Sigmund Freud's book, The Future of an Illusion, and how these ideas, grounded in a naturalistic worldview, stand behind many of today's moral conflicts, shape the Western worldview, and maybe even deformed the worldview of many Christians. Before we dive into the mind of Freud, here's a bit of background on his life. Freud was born in 1856 in what is now the Czech Republic. His family was Jewish, and when they moved to Vienna, Freud grew up in a city that was both intellectually alive and deeply anti-Semitic. The so-called talking cure for repressed memories, which became the seed of his psychoanalysis. Through it all, Freud was searching for one thing, a scientific account of the human mind. His letters, collaborations, and theories reveal a man convinced that if you dig deep enough into dreams and desires and childhood memories, you could uncover the hidden mechanics of human life. But his efforts were largely unscientific and impossible to falsify. Here's how Todd Defense explains this problem in his TED-Ed video, where two lawyers argue the case for and against his ideas. Let's listen into this short exchange.
Freud was an innovator, linking ideas across many fields. His concepts have become everyday terms that shape how we understand and talk about our own experiences. The Oedipus complex, ego and id, defense mechanisms, death wishes, all Freud. But Freud didn't present himself as a social theorist. He insisted that his work was scientific. Are you saying he repressed inconvenient facts? Freud's theories were unfalsifiable. Wait, so you're saying he was right? No, his ideas were framed so that there's no way to empirically verify them. Freud didn't even necessarily believe in the psychoanalysis he was peddling. He was pessimistic about the impact of therapy. What? I think I need to lie down. Many of Sigmund Freud's ideas don't hold up to modern science, and his clinical practices don't meet today's ethical standards. At the same time, he sparked a revolution in psychology and society, and created a vocabulary for discussing emotion. Freud made his share of mistakes, but is a thinker responsible for how subsequent generations put their ideas to use. Do they deserve the blame, credit, or redemption when we put history on trial?
Is Freud responsible for how his ideas are used or abused today? It really doesn't matter. The bigger question, the question we'll address today, is how did he influence our thinking with his ideas? But let's keep this thought in mind. The lack of scientific rigor was not really a problem for Freud because he was not really just studying people. He was building a worldview in which unconscious drives, not divine purpose, explain who we are. Nowhere is this clearer than in Freud's writings on faith. In his writings such as Totem and Taboo, The Future of an Illusion, the book we're exploring today, and Moses and Monotheism, Freud argued that religion is nothing more than a projection of the mind, a wish fulfillment. Freud believed that as children, we depend on our fathers for protection. When we grow up and face the terrors of life, death, nature, suffering, we project that dependency outward and invent an all-powerful Heavenly Father. Religion, he then concluded, is therefore just the universal obsessional neurosis of mankind. He conceded that religion comforts, it gives community and promotes morality and carries beauty. He even admitted he could be wrong, that perhaps his atheism was itself an illusion. But make no mistake, Freud was committed to his own atheist projection and wish fulfillment that religion was harmful. It distracted people from real problems, he said. It kept them in psychological immaturity. It promised unrealistic rewards. And worst of all, in his eyes, religion repressed natural desires like sexuality. For Freud, the alternative was clear. Humanity must grow up and put away childish things, reject faith and embrace reason, reject God and embrace science. So as we explore the mind of Freud, we see a man who has deep questions but settled, I think, for shallow answers. His legacy challenges us to show that the gospel, not science alone, not psychology alone, offers the fullest account of who we are and the hope we need. So with that background in mind, let me bring in Leroy. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm good. How are you?
I am doing pretty well, all things considered. It has been a heavy couple weeks. We've had We've all seen the assassination. We haven't talked publicly, I mean, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Vodi Bakum passed, just yesterday? So that's been a big loss to Christian voice in the culture. So there are some heavy times, heavy things. Any thoughts on Vodi or
Yeah,
Charlie, whatever one you want?
they both had tremendous passion for the Word of God, and they both had booming voices in their own way. And I think obviously they had a love for the Lord, a love for God's Word, incredible belief in the direction that they were heading in. But they married it with a passion that captured the hearts of the people who were listening to them. And you knew where they stood. And the very fact that both of them are off the scene at around the same time, God's doing something.
Yeah.
God's doing something.
Yeah. You said something there that before we get into the show, I just to echo something really valuable about, you could say, Charlie Kirk or Vodi Bakum or even Donald Trump, is that they're all voices that are honest publicly about what they think privately.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you hate their ideas or love their ideas, that's not even the point at this. Or I'm not equating them in terms of all their theology and ideology. That's not the common thread. The common thread is that they were honest about it. They weren't saying one thing privately and another thing publicly to win audiences. They were just honest about who they were, what they thought, what they believed. So you could decide, yeah, I don't support this person, or yeah, I love this person, or I like this or I don't like that. But there was an honesty about them. And I think that's actually why they made inroads into the culture, because people are really starving for honesty from our politicians, from our pastors, from our theologians, from our educators, and not this duplicitous saying one thing in secret and it only comes out when you're recorded somewhere. We're starving for honesty in a world of dishonesty. And I think that really says a lot about even the willingness to follow people that are nuts sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm not putting those three in that category. I'm just saying just the willingness to follow nutty people is sometimes we just love the fact that they're honest. And so if you have no boundary condition and your philosophy isn't right, and your worldview is messed up, you'll just follow the first honest person you find, even if they're leading you down a primrose path.
Right. That's an interesting point, because there's no filter between what Donald Trump thinks and what he says.
Yeah.
It's like there's no impediments. The average person might say, I probably shouldn't say that. And they won't even say the words, I probably shouldn't say that out loud. He will say, no, I probably shouldn't say that, and then say it anyway.
Yeah, I don't think he has the inner voice at all. I probably shouldn't say that. He's like, I should probably say that. That's his inner monologue.
And the thing about Vodi that always stuck out to me is every once in a while when I would watch him preach, he'd be preaching so passionately with tears running down his face. I think he's the only preacher that I've ever seen. I've seen preachers cry, don't get me wrong, but he's the only one where I could sense that he was feeling something so deeply on the inside that that the tears were welling out of his eyes as he preached. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's authenticity. That's authenticity. And
yeah, for sure. Hey, shout out. Yeah, Rico Suave. That goes back. Good to hear from you, brother. Yeah, so it's good to everyone join us live. And plus, just a reminder, because you are live, if you want to jump in, put out some questions as we go through this or ask for clarification, that is always welcome to our folks on the live side of things. All right, Leroy, let's jump into our Freud discussion and look at the framing for his worldview. How did I come into being? And what happens when I die? I want to take those two questions together, even though technically what happens when I die is sort of at the end of the worldview thinking. But we're just going to collapse those into one bucket for Freud. And so to start with that first part of it, here's my summary, and I'm really curious what you think. Because obviously we say, oh, he's an atheist. He has a Darwinian naturalist approach. Humans evolved from lower hominids. He's not going to divert or go away from that
Mm-mm.
framework. But we've seen Marx and others who essentially have that same framework, but they have very different interpretations of what that means. And that's what we're really going to be the most interesting part of his answers to these questions of how do we come into being, what happens when I die. So we were talking pre-show actually, and you said something really that struck me, and I think it's a good framing for this. I think for Freud, it's this idea that we are autonomous beings and we're forced to live in civilized society. That's really shapes the nature of what who we are, how we exist in this world, how we come into being is something that we're shaped to be by societies.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts with that narrative. Humans rose above our animal desires like incest, cannibalism, and bloodlust through purely natural evolutionary processes, not by divine design. That's the key. So there's no supernatural creator in Freud's account. Our consciousness, our unconscious psyche, and our sense of self arise from biological, psychological, developmental, and traumas that will come back to that concept from experiences in the ancient past, which is also another pretty interesting thing that will lead us to how psychology is done today. So for him, again, to fix the present, we got to fix the past. He puts it this way in his book: the present must first have become the past before it will furnish clues about assessing what is to come. And that's right at the very beginning of this book. And until I really read the whole book, which, by the way, I found a fascinating book, one of my favorite reads so far of the whole series of stuff we've done. I found this really interesting. But let me just say that part again. The present must first have become the past before it will furnish clues to assessing what is to come. And that's all of Freudian psychology. So before I kick it to you, Leroy, that's a lot to kind of pull together. I had this clip from a TED Ed video, and I'll link to this in the show notes for people if they want to watch the whole video in the past. But this puts Freud's ideas into context. And in this clip, I'll just set up too, there's two lawyers essentially putting Freud on trial. So you hear a couple voices that are going back and they'll disagree. And that's what it is, sort of Freud on trial. What are his ideas? But I think this really sets this case of what I just described.
Modern therapy techniques that millions of people rely on came out of the work he started with psychoanalysis. And today, everyone knows there's an unconscious. That idea was popularized by Freud. Psychologists today only believe in a cognitive unconscious, the fact that you aren't aware of everything going on at a given moment. Freud took this idea way too far, ascribing deep meaning to everything. He built his theories on scientific ideas that were outdated even in his own time, not just by today's standards. For example, he thought individual psychology is derived from the biological inheritance of events in ancient history. And I mean ancient, like the Ice Age or the killing of Moses. Freud and his closest allies actually believed these prehistorical traumas had ongoing impacts on human psychology. He thought that the phase of cold indifference to sexuality during pubescence was literally an echo of the Ice Age. With fantastical beliefs like these, how can we take him seriously?
Okay, that to me is really fascinating, Leroy. So let me kick it to you. When it comes into how did I come into being, for Freud, it's not just the evolutionary forces, it's the very nature of who Leroy Hill is shaped by these ancient historical events, traumas that you never experienced. What does this start to sound like? Let me throw that in your direction.
Well, it is. It sounds crazy. I mean, but Freud isn't the only one who is thinking along those lines. I think they're deeply rooted in naturalism and materialism, and attempting to explain how people become what they are and who they are. But there are two other thinkers that are trying to work Freud's ideas out. One is called named Lev Vygotsky, and the other one is called Piaget. Both were materialists, just like Freud, and both posited that human development, Piaget is humans development stage theory. Lev Vygotsky is more in line with what we're talking about, and he's arguing that humans inherit their ways of thinking and their ways of being from the way societies are actively functioning. When you look at all that, together with Freud, what they're all suggesting is humans become what they become not because of some divine intervention, but because of how humans have experienced the past and how societies frame that past. Not only merely frame it, but ensconce that past into how it frames its morality, how it frames its laws, how it frames what it is to be a man, a woman, a child, an uncle, and what they're all saying is that these things are not disconnected. This is how we become who we are. So the past is more present than you and I would believe on given all their views.
Hmm. Yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit later in terms of finding purpose and how do we fulfill purpose. But
Mhm.
just for me, when I hear that, of course, a lot of us think, "Oh, you have this trauma, your daddy issues or mommy issues." Those sort
Mhm.
of superficial language. But he's really when we talk about invented traumas because you have this unconscious trauma that you suppress the traumas. He doesn't just mean something bad happened when you were 4 and you forgot about it. He's talking about suppressed trauma. Think about critical theories. I think this will be
Mhm.
relevant
Oh,
later. Like Leroy Hill, today, you can't survive because you're suffering the traumas of slavery from 150 years ago. You just don't even know it. And until we can
yeah,
bring
but
those memories to the fore, and until you can
deal with them.
verbalize those and express those traumas, you can't become a whole person in a sense.
Yeah, I think what he's arguing is that these traumas get ensconced in a society's ways of being, and then they get transported
Mm-hmm.
into our ways of thinking. So that I mean, and this would be in long with what do they call it? The critical race theorists call it psychological trauma, the kind of
Yeah.
trauma that comes on from
Yeah.
slavery that we're all dealing with
Unconscious
it today.
bias, they talk about. Like whites
Unconscious
have an
bias. Yeah,
unconscious
yeah,
bias
yeah.
because that's, again, our deep historical memories, which we've suppressed. So I am guilty for my past because even I've just suppressed the memory of it. And when I'm suppressing those memories, I'm driven by those things. And until I bring those unconscious biases to the front, I can't solve those issues and become fully who I am. So this is really the idea, is that those things shape who I am, how I came into being as an individual.
Yeah, and that's this is the whole point about how society socializes us. It's going to take all those ideas and all those traumas, and because it can never really be relieved of it, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to build that into the way that you and I even think about what's thinkable, or the way you and I function within our society. So on Freud, when the critical race theorists and people who agree with that view argue that we all have unconscious bias, what they're saying is we've been programmed by the people who created societies and their experiences to be the kind of people we are today. So we really have no
Mm-hmm.
control over our own thoughts or our own feelings. We're just pre-programmed robots.
Yeah. And okay, so we'll put a sort of a pin in that because we'll come back to those ideas later in our other worldview questions. I think that's a good framing to start with. I just want to deal with that other worldview question then. What happens when I die? Well, it's kind of obvious death ends consciousness. There's no mortality, there's no afterlife in any meaningful sense, let alone the Christian sense. But the hope of life beyond the grave is another, what Freud would say is a wish fulfillment. The idea that we hope we'll survive is just wish casting onto the reality that that doesn't exist. It's projected by religion. He calls those sort of beliefs illusions that humans cling to because of the fear and desires. So there's again that we have this fear, we have these desires, whether conscious or unconscious, and that's really what's driving our invention of these ideas. He says it this way in his book: it would be very nice if there were a God. Well, sure, that'd be great. And life beyond the grave, but it is a very striking fact that all this is exactly as we are bound to wish it to be. In other words,
Mhm.
it doesn't exist. So that's his big framing. It's all invented psychology, culturally or individually, and they're just not real. So, any thoughts to add about that? I mean, it's not
Yeah,
really a deep thought here, but just.
no, but it is a deep thought. I remember reading C.S. Lewis's book, A Pilgrim's Regress, and there's this scene. I mean, I won't go into the scene. It's really an amazing scene, cited by just about everybody. But this guy was rescued from the spirit of the age. The spirit of the age is viewed as a mountain that entraps its denizens and its heart, right? So the guy is rescued by Wisdom, who is portrayed as this figure who comes riding in on a horse and who saves him. And Wisdom, he begins to walk with Wisdom, and Wisdom begins to ask him, "Do you want to know why you were trapped?" Well, one of the questions was, "Yeah, the spirit of the age kept telling me that my beliefs were wish fulfillment." And Wisdom flips the script and says, "Well, why weren't his beliefs wish fulfillment?
Yeah. Yes.
Why weren't his beliefs wish fulfillment?" And the character, as he thinks about it, that if we're really being bare bones, he has no more reason to believe what he believes than you have to believe what you believe.
Yeah.
Then why aren't his views a wish fulfillment?
Yeah. That's exactly why I called this episode "The Atheist Delusion is the Illusion." It's the
Exactly.
circular reasoning that undermines any one of his thoughts having any meaning.
Exactly. And that's a to me that was one of the great points that he brings out in that book, is that, and he's aiming at Freud in that book, by the way. He's really
Yeah.
aiming at Freud. Is if the atheist wants to call religion wish fulfillment, then how does the atheist escape his own views as being wish fulfillment? And he flips the script on the atheist by subjecting his own views. He doesn't know what happens after the grave, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's as much faith for him, so to speak, as it is for us, if that's the case.
Yeah.
So he hoists himself on his own petard, as they say.
Yeah, and this actually leads to the next question because I struggled with this one. If I say, "What is my purpose?" Here's my best guess at this. And part of it, I think, is because some of Freud's circular reasoning or question begging, where he kind of assumes the conclusion in the way he frames the question, it doesn't always line up for me what he's trying to say, or I think it ends up being inconsistent to some degree. But here's my best guess at it. I'm curious to know what you think. If I'd have to summarize it this way, purpose is found in desires, but even our desires are unreliable. So we need society to tell us what is right. But of course, society is bound by unconscious past and histories. And what society is telling us right is also distorted because of the things that we don't even know they're driving society. So it's this sort of morass and just conflation of all these ideas. So under Freud's view, then, it looks like purpose really just becomes a man-centered project, an anthropocentric project. Can't even say that word today. But we generate meaning through our efforts, our desires, our social or societal life, the choices we make, our social groups. Religion is just one of those that offer the sense of symbolic purpose, like pleasing God or achieving afterlife. But Freud sees that all as wishful illusion. Here's the way he writes it in the book. And then I want you to unpack whether you think I'm understanding him right or have missed something. He says, "We shall tell ourselves that it would be very nice if there was a God who created the world and was a benevolent providence, and if there was a moral order in the universe and an afterlife. But it is very striking fact that all this is exactly as we are bound to wish it to be, and it would be more remarkable still if our wretched, ignorant, and downtrodden ancestors has succeeded in solving all these difficult riddles of the universe. But of course, they haven't, so we're all lost." Where do we get purpose from in Freud? What am I missing, Leroy?
Well, if we start from the beginning, what are his presuppositions? What undergirds his belief? It's that there's no immaterial world, and we're all finite beings who come into existence at a point in time in history, and who will exit the stage at a point in history, which with no where we just becomes, to put it bluntly, a part of the universe's furniture. And what Freud is really talking about is he's trying to limit the meaning that we can give ourselves by painting everything that is not viewed as is not viewed as source as naturalism or materialism. He's painting everything. He's trying to cut that off, while at the same time opening up man's, what he might call, authentic self, to be living in the real world. And in that sense, what Freud does is he um, imperializes naturalism and materialism, and reduces any other idea that competes with that to nothingness. So on Freud, you could be whatever you want to be, as long
Mm-hmm.
as you let your unbridled self be,
Mm-hmm.
except if you want to be religious, because that's
Yeah.
a problem.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
purpose on that view would never be ultimate. It would always be temporal, right? Because you can have no
Yeah.
ultimate purpose on that view, and it would always be temporal. In other words, the purpose that I give myself, and what Freud is just simply doing in terms of purpose is saying you can be anything that you want to be, or do anything that you want to do, as long as you're starting with the fact that all the immaterial stuff and all the religious stuff is bogus.
Yeah.
So
And that's the weird part too, though, because he seems to say that exactly what you're saying. It's your desires, you shape your own purpose, your identity, your reality. But then what he gives with one hand, he takes with the other, because he says, but those things are destructive and will destroy you. That's why we need civilization to repress or manage those desires. But then we need to use psychoanalysts to uncover those suppressed desires so that you can be a healthy person that you're meant to be. But as soon as you become and unmask those repressed desires, we need to suppress them again because they're destructive. This seems to be like what he's stuck in for me. And
he
I'm
can't
like,
get out of that loop. He can't get out of that loop because, I mean, there's first of all, he's he's one of those guys who, like Hobbes, who assumes that everybody is a good person. I mean, if you
mm-hmm,
would ask him, he would say no, everybody isn't a good person, right? I mean, if we were talking to him, he would probably say that.
yeah,
But his ideas don't cash out that way. They cash out like everybody wants the same thing, and that there really are no that. I mean, and I'm not saying what he says. I'm just really arguing about how they cash out. There really
yeah.
are no perversities, right? There really are no perverse selves,
Yeah,
right?
he opens the
Because
door for that thinking, at least, even if that's not what he meant to say, or that he
I'm
opens the
not saying
door to
that that's
that.
what he said. I'm just saying that he's removed all limitations from
Yeah,
that. You
yeah,
know, if you're purely naturalistic and materialistic, where are your morality coming from? How
mm-hmm,
do you ever how can you ever develop a limiting factor for what's right and what's wrong? You really can't. But then I think he recognizes that in unleashing people to be their true inner selves, he might be unleashing a bunch of animals. I think that he can't escape that. And I think
mm-hmm.
that what we see as tension is his honest wrestling with how those ideas will ultimately cash out. Because when you begin to free people's sexual repression, what might have been a matchstick becomes a blazing inferno. And while one has the potential to burn yourself up, the other one has the potential to burn the whole world.
Yeah,
So I don't think that
yeah.
he really.
That leads me to another aspect of this, and again, it sort of seems to collapse in on itself into incoherence when I try to make sense of it.
Mhm.
But one aspect that does seem to be clear is his idea that purpose, whatever it is anti-work. That somehow work that we do is a negative. That'd be the opposite of a Christian worldview. We believe God created us to do work, to do the good works that He has created. New Testament would talk about the works that He's given to us from the foundations of the world. So work is a healthy, good thing. He seems to suggest that work is an unhealthy thing that's put on us. It's not a positive, as again we'd see in Genesis, but it's a burden by society. And our passions are the real driver. Here's
Mhm.
the way he kind of says this. It is a curious fact that human beings, incapable of living in individual isolation, so we're not capable of being alone. We're drawn to social groups. We need to be in social groups. Nevertheless, we find the sacrifices that cultures ask of them in order to make human coexistence possible is a heavy load to bear. So again, he's saying our purpose is fulfilled in community. We need community, but community imposes these things that suppress our real desires, and that's a horrible thing. Yet we need the thing. So it seems like you're just, again, always going to be stuck in, I need this, but it's always bad for me. I need Leroy. I need you to be in, I need relationships like you, but every relationship is going to be a healthy relationship,
Right.
right?
Yeah, but listen, um, if he accepts the need to be in society as a real and true need, then there are a set of ideas that are going to follow from that. The first question is, why do we have that need? Where does it come from?
Mm-hmm.
If his idea of repressed thoughts and desires are true, um, how can they be true in the face of that real need to be amongst other people? I mean, how can they be true in the sense that if I'm truly designed, or, and he wouldn't use the word design, but if I'm truly have this real need that is fundamental and I cannot live without, and I cannot do without, and I cannot be without, and at the same time I'm arguing that being around these people is problematic, what's the through line? What's the through line? Well, either the need to be around each other is not real, or my theories are not have not just worked themselves out in such a way as that I could give a sufficient answer for that. So now you're stuck with two competing ideas. I have a need that it can only be met amongst other
Mm-hmm.
people, with other people, but when I'm amongst other people, they suppress my true self,
Yes.
right?
And, and isn't that the most psychologically destabilizing thing? Because what you're building in people is the idea that if you're struggling, you need to be around other people. And then you're telling them as soon as you're around other people, all those people are toxic. So
Hmm.
it's toxic to be alone and it's toxic to be with people. There's no exit. There's no off ramp to the toxicity of aloneness or relationship. And
And
this is
there is
Freud's
one if you
problem.
there's one if you're going to argue that I'm going to become my true self. If you're going to argue that I'm going to become my true self, I can only be my true self in and amongst other people, right? That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of what we learn in the
Didn't
scriptures.
get that. Could you try again?
Yeah, try again, Leroy,
I'm trying to turn
because
my phone off because
even your phone doesn't understand you.
it doesn't. But if I can only become my true self in and among other people, then the need to repress parts of myself in order to live in society is a necessity, right? I need to
Mm-hmm.
repress it. I need to repress my sexual urges. I need to repress my deepest desires in order to be amongst other people. But Freud is all about the need to not repress
Yes.
those inner desires. So it's not the world that's the problem, or the reality of the need to be amongst other people is the problem. It's his ideas that are the
Yes.
problem, because he's not grappling with reality. He has a set of presuppositions that he's trying to work out, but the human so-called animal refuses to comply.
Yeah. So that's exactly what I'm thinking is so the purpose then is discovered in repressed desire. So if you can discover these, then you'll get this sense of purpose. But let me go back. I'll show you another clip from that TED Ed video and see if the way it's framed here reminds you of any particular ideology today where passions are the real driver. I think this is going to be an interesting one.
Plenty of his ideas were harmful without any misapplication. He viewed homosexuality as a developmental glitch. He coined the term penis envy, meaning women are haunted for life by their lack of penises. Freud was a product of his era. Yes, some of the specifics were flawed, but he created a new space for future scientists to explore, investigate, and build upon.
Does that remind you of anything? The whole concept of repressed desires, penis envy. What ideology might that be a precursor to, Leroy?
Sounds something a little like feminism.
Definitely a feminist thought, right? Why does that come to your mind?
Well, these are the base drivers for when you listen to modern feminists who think that they've been repressed by men. So the goal for them is to become like men in their actions within the workplace, because they believe that their ideas are repressed. Their freedoms, their true selves are repressed because society is man centered. So the need to decenter men is at the forefront of the feminist view, because if men are not decentered, then women can't become the center. I mean, at least that's how that struck me.
Yeah, one of the things I thought I couldn't help resist when I heard that was transgender ideology. Think
It's
about it.
there.
If you're a woman who has this desire, like all these problems are this internal desire, this penis envy. Well, isn't the solution then through technology to build one?
Or to
Have
be,
one
or
made
yeah,
by a
or to have
doctor,
one.
and then you can fulfill this true desire. So now Freud probably wouldn't have argued it that way. I mean, he would have said that's a negative repressed desire and whatever. I'm sure you could go another way with it, but it seems like he opens this door to say, hey, if my purpose is in these repressed desires, and yes, my biology is one thing, but my true self, my true identity is the opposite sex, then to unsuppress this desire,
I need to
I
become
need
that.
to take hormones and socially transition and do these things. So again, he predates those ideas, but I think his psychology opens the door to those ideas being embraced in a
See,
certain group who want to interpret his ideas from that
See,
framework.
here's what's interesting about what happened in our discussion last. See, and this is a thing that I've been saying to myself. See, I'm reluctant to go there to the extreme in all of my thoughts there, and it's very interesting how even in me wrestling with what he just said, I wanted to limit it to the concept of feminism, but took it to the ultimate. And I don't mean
Yeah.
that in a negative way at all. I just mean you literally, that's where it's going to cash out. It's because you got to say it's not going to limit itself to women merely wanting to decenter men. Women will ultimately, if they have this innate desire to be men and it's repressed on Freud, they're not nearly going to decenter them. They're going to want to be,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but that's the same way with men who are going to want to be.
Well, they want to become women because they're trying to deal with their toxic past.
Right.
So again, Freud, this is a Freudian concept. In the video we saw earlier, he talked about the young man who's frigid because it goes back to the ice age and we were cold and suppressed. And he talks about the death of Moses and how that creates these repressed and toxic and difficult circumstances that are trauma to us today. So if you're a man dealing with your trauma of how men have oppressed women in the past, then the only way to deal with that trauma is to change your sexual identity into womanhood, because that's going to free you from the trauma of the past. I really think that there's something to that flow of stuff. Now, again, I'm not arguing Freud said that. I'm saying
Right.
that this is what Freud opens the
You're saying
door to.
this is how his ideas cash out. Ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
and again, not every person is going to want to go to that extreme, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it may be being a male feminist is a waypoint in the destination, and it may be ultimately becoming a woman because you so identify with them is the extreme of that. So we should expect to see people who we should expect to see people on that spectrum is what I'm getting at.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just laughing because Tom says, or they want to access the ladies' room. Okay, so I'm not saying all those
But that's
causes may
another
be the same. There might be different
Yeah, but
motives.
that's another waypoint on the. I mean, if we were charting this out, right? And you know how you have the
Yeah.
numbers chart, we had to put the dot on the numbers chart. These people would be somewhere on the spectrum, but they're all on the
Yeah.
same. They're all on the same idea, cashing it out at various levels according to their own desires. Like some people don't have the desire to go to the extreme and go through all that suffering and all those surgeries,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they certainly do identify with those ideas. I think that's a legitimate perspective there.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joshua's got a few comments. He loves the discussion. Love to talk more. Yes, Josh, hit us up, send us a message. We'll see about we can extend this conversation. We'd love to come to your channel. But I would say this, that idea of purpose and repressed desires is really a critical piece that I think is playing out in a lot of different ways And definitely Freud opened the door, even if he wasn't teaching it in that exact way. This gets
Mhm.
us to the moral right thing to do. Maybe more Tom's question. Is it right for dudes to go in a ladies' room or whatever it is? What is right and wrong? So for Freud, morality in his schema is a cultural construct, right? It's society frames the moral right and wrong. There's no absolute revelation. There's no God. There's nothing to constrain that. So he sees religious rules as one layer of how society controls or manages or suppresses desires. But he argues religion does not really ground morality in anything real. He says it this way: immorality, no less than morality, has at times found support in religion. So he sees it as one of these invented social factors that the society's just invented. So what's right and wrong then emerges from social agreements. We talked about contract theory, the Hobbesian sort of thing. So he seems to at least parallel that idea or maybe tangentially cross paths with social contract theory, although from an irreligious or a godless perspective, because you could have Hobbesians who are doing that from a God perspective, but he does seem to have this social contract theory at least open the door for a secularist to do that. But then he talks about rational evaluation and by suppressing our instinctual impulses in favor of civilization. So here again, when he talks about morality, this is what's so odd to me, Leroy, is that it's all these factors, the rationality, which is autonomous rationality we talked about, but then it's also the suppression of these desires through social contract, through making these relationships. But that's also, he just told us that suppressing those things is bad, but we need to suppress them in order to find moral good or bad, at least within a collectivist sense.
What's amazing is I was thinking as you were talking, I think it was Locke who said men come together in order to secure their goods. In other words, they come together first they agree to come together in order to secure their goods, and then they sublimate their own desires in order to be in society together, and in that way they protect themselves, and that's why we have laws. Um, and then you have Freud, who agrees with the need to come together, right, in order to form societies and to repress parts of yourselves. And it might be that he's arguing that there is a damage that comes along with that, right? And I think that's what he would say on one level. There's a
Mm-hmm.
damage that comes along with that, and that damage is to the ultimate self. And but he's also failing to acknowledge that if we don't come together for security, then the damage won't be me harming myself. It will be other men who are living out their unrepressed desires who will
Yeah.
harm me.
Yeah.
The whole point of the whole social construct is that whatever society agrees is right or wrong is right. If society agrees that slavery is right, then who are men to complain on Freud?
Yeah.
And society has agreed that slavery is right, that you can enslave people, that you can treat them like luggage and do whatever you will to them. Why are they wrong? If
Yeah.
society is the fount of morality, then the Nazis were 100% right to do to the Jewish people what they did.
It was good for them, may not be good for us. We have different set of standards and rules and morality, but there's no way to objectively say they were wrong. Just that was good for
Exactly.
them, but not good for us.
And this is where his ideas, if you live them out in reality, the sheer foolishness of them come to the forefront. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why his ideas are coming. It isn't religion that are destroying his ideas. Reality is destroying his ideas
Yeah.
because they can't really be lived out.
Mm-hmm.
They can't really be lived out because of the way that people are. So if my wife were in this discussion, she would automatically say, this is why Freud fell out of favor, is because his ideas were just proved wrong in just about every way because they can't really be lived out. I
Yeah.
mean, this isn't to say that he doesn't give us some insight into the reality of our unconscious thinking, and that we kind of need to think about that in some ways if we
Mm-hmm.
can. But it is to say that if you try to live out Freud on Freud, you would go insane, and the
Yeah.
world would be
Yeah.
hellish.
Yeah, I thought about having your wife come on as our third guest, as our third person today to be our guest, but then I didn't want her to suppress your masculinity with her presence, and bring up any childhood trauma from you, so I decided against that. Very Freudian of me, right? So
Very Freudian.
all right. So
But
Joshua brought up this idea of identity. I don't think we'll get to that today directly, because for Freud, of course, there is no ultimate ground for identity. It's all self. I think we covered that. From the Christian worldview perspective, I do think that that is the worldview that gives us both a transcendent part of identity in our soulish existence and an essential identity in our body plan, the way God has designed us. We're maybe not going to get to that big alternative today, but yeah, Joshua, I do think that the Christian worldview is that, and I'm happy to send you some links to that. People can find them on my site at morethancake.org, some links to some short videos I do on identity. But that really is an important conversation to have, and how Christians can solve a lot of these problems. And we'll get to some of that in. Maybe that can be our final thoughts. I don't know when we get to some of our final thoughts, Leroy.
yeah,
Maybe
you
one
know
of
what's
us will bring that
interesting?
up.
You know what's interesting? I was in a discussion with a mutual friend of ours about some of these issues, and he brought out that we don't do a good enough job of of making a distinction between male and female and masculinity and femininity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Male and
Mm-hmm.
female are
Yeah.
biological, right? They are what we are. But he argued that masculinity and femininity are degreed properties. And what he meant was that some people are more masculine than others, and some
Mm-hmm.
women are more feminine than others. And
That's true.
because we're confusing, or should we say, bringing the two together, and we're not really making that distinction, we're not really wrestling with the reality that some men do feel. Not saying that it's true, but because it's subjective. But some men do feel effeminate. I won't say my.
Yeah.
Listen to this. I was in sniper school, and I had one of my buddies graduated sniper school the year before I did, and we had the same instructor. And my instructor said to me, "Oh, you know this guy, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is a good friend of mine." And he goes, "He seemed to be a bit more effeminate than most men." And I've always cracked my buddy up like that because he was a dandy. He was a man. I mean, a total manly
Mm-hmm.
man. But he those qualities, even in some guys, are hard to escape. But
Mm.
anyway, totally off topic. But I could see. I mean, without these distinctions, and without really being able to think well about these topics, even the ones that Freud raised. So if we can say that Freud does a good thing, is he highlights the need to think well about these topics and to make distinctions and to really press the points where his ideas might seem to make sense, but they also fail. If that's something, I mean, he may be a good conversation starter for us, and that we might be able to reason through some of his arguments and show where they make a little sense and where they catch it. So maybe that's the good of Freud. But yeah, I don't know where I went down that line. So
No, I know it's actually Search for Truth on X had said this is a interesting conversation. Joshua said he's usefully wrong. So
exactly,
that's kind
exactly.
of
That's a
thing.
good point.
He's usefully wrong. Although I will argue, Leroy, and I've told my wife this for years, because she always wanted to have a daughter. We only had 3 sons, and I said, "Well, that's because you married a man who is all man. I cannot produce females because I am so masculine. That's clearly I'm pretty sure that's the science behind it, that I
Oh
am just too
yeah,
much
no,
man to produce women.
you have too much testosterone. That is
Too
it.
much,
That
yeah,
is
just
it.
too much manliness going on. So
That is it.
you'd have to marry a more effeminate man to produce women.
Ooh,
Yeah, I'm pretty
yeah,
sure that
yeah.
is again, that's the science of it. So I
That's
don't
so.
know.
That's
That's a
so.
terrible thought. Terrible
That's
thought.
actually funny.
Maybe that's very too Freudian of me.
That's actually very funny. And Freud might agree with you. I mean, on
You
Freud,
might.
he might agree with you. You know.
Yeah, maybe. Well, let's talk about real quick our fourth worldview question. How can I fulfill my purpose? Again, it's that sort of emotional fulfillment, is psychological and social project where we overcome our unconscious and repressed memories. You work, you use self-discipline, you have social groups, you use reason, which we talked is maybe not very reasonable earlier, and science serve as tools. But what he means by those may not be exactly what we all mean. But Freud hopes humanity will, he says, renounce a good part of our infantile wishes. So here again is this, he wants to give it with one hand and take it with the other. So we have these repressed desires, but those are also infantile desires. So we need these other things to discern, I guess, which is the good desires and the bad, but there is no right or wrong. So how do we know? But we have to shift our religious energies into rational life. So was Freud a brilliant thinker or a nutbag? That's sort of the question we could ask ourselves. Or maybe he was both. Maybe that's a false dichotomy. He could have been
Yeah,
both.
you know what I would
Here,
say? You know what I would
yeah.
say? He reminds me of so many thinkers of the past who have to get their ideas out in paper. They have to get them out. They have to say what they have to say, and they leave it for later generations to wrestle with and wrestle through what they said. I mean, whenever I've read some of the thinkers of the past, Schopenhauer, Hegel, I don't know how you even wrestle with that. Some of the things that they said were abject nuts, but I think what they think is that later generations will wrestle through what they had. So they're the first guy to put it out on paper, and the rest of us are left to deal with the aftermath of that. And ultimately, what happens with guys like Freud is their ideas get rejected because they can't be lived out. They don't make much sense. But in his life, he's a hero. He gets lauded for being the one who wrote it. But it's not his generation that has to deal with the fallout from it. It's later generations. So, in one sense, he's a very smart guy. Let's not say anything about that. But I don't think he thinks that his ideas are going to get cashed out in his lifetime, and therefore he's not going to suffer the slings and arrows that come with it. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it actually connects to before we were talking a little bit about, and you maybe think of this term, this idea of reason in a certain way. I called it my takeaway from what you said brilliantly before the show was narcissistic reasoning, reasoning based on the self. Here's a quick video, our last clip that we're going to use today that I think brings this idea out and summarizes what you had said before. So check this one out.
This is Dr. Sigmund Freud, one of the most innovative thinkers in the history of psychology, an egomaniac who propagated pseudoscientific theories. Well, which is it? He tackled issues medicine refused to address. Freud's private practice treated women who suffered from what was called hysteria at the time, and their complaints hadn't been taken seriously at all. From the women with depression he treated initially to World War I veterans with PTSD, Freud's talking cure worked, and the visibility he gave his patients forced the medical establishment to acknowledge their psychological disorders were real. He certainly didn't help all his patients. Freud was convinced that our behavior is shaped by unconscious urges and repressed memories. He invented baseless, unconscious, or irrational drivers behind the behavior of trauma survivors and caused real harm. How's that? He misrepresented some of his most famous case studies, claiming his treatment had cured patients when in fact they had gotten worse. Later therapists, influenced by his theories, coaxed their patients into recovering supposedly repressed memories of childhood abuse that never happened. Lives and families were torn apart.
I know because of your counseling work that you've done, Leroy, and your wife, Margie, have done, that is a real thing. These sort of narcissistic reasoning based on false memories, they get surfaced through counselors. And this happens in the Christian counseling world. This is one of the things why I was excited for this show, because I think that this is a real problem when we try to find our purpose by surfacing these memories that aren't real memories, but our therapist can bring them out. There's a problem in Freud's day. And then yet we want to say, oh no, nobody believes it. But we practice this in our psychology. And Christians are not immune from this because this is something still taught. Speak to that from your experience.
Well, people don't. I mean, To all of you who are listening, nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong at all. Most people don't want to accept responsibility or even their part of the responsibility for what may have gone wrong. Now, when you get into the counseling room, what you hope to have is a person who is a Christian, who actually believes in a real right and wrong, who will aid you towards seeing things as they really are, seeing the part that we play, whether it's minuscule or large, in those issues, so that we can arrive at the truth and then ultimately deal with what that truth means. But here's the problem. Most people who seek out counselors today are not seeking out a person who is going to tell me the truth. They're seeking out people who are going to tell me that I'm right and who are going to justify and here's who's going to justify the outcome. So here's how that might work. Those people will go to the counselor and the counselor might ask, what do you hope to get out of this at the end? And all of a sudden, all the counseling theory or all the counseling practice goes toward bringing that in toward the person, even if it means positing that they're right even when they're wrong. And that the
And you have to
people
find reasons to justify them being right. So, because there aren't ones, you generate those through surfacing repressed memories that aren't real.
exactly that's exactly right. Listen, my mom used to spank us, and but she my mom used to put the beat down, and I know where that came from. And I remember
Because you were
being
bad.
yeah sometimes. But I remember the a day I graduated boot camp, and I came home and I was in my uniform, and I was sitting on my aunt's step, and my mom was sitting there, and she wanted me to sit on her lap, which was so awkward. I'm in my military uniform, and my mom wants to hold me, and I remember looking at my mom getting off her lap, which was what I wanted to do, because she was just in love and everything. And I asked my mom, "Why did you beat me that way? Why?" Now I knew she wasn't going to answer, and I knew she wasn't going to give a good answer. And I told my mother in that conversation that I love you regardless. I didn't forget what had happened. I didn't forget why it happened. I didn't forget the extent that it happened. But what I needed her to know is that I forgave her for what happened. Now, if you ask me about my relationship with my mom, I love my mom like anybody loves their mom. I do. And I'd have no reservation in saying that. But for me, and for there needed to be a reckoning for all of that, and that she needed to know going forward that our relationship was not didn't exclude all those things that happened in the past, but they were that it would still go on, and I would still love her in spite of all those things happening in the past. Now, what I say in that instance is that I had a need to be honest and to be faithful in my relationship with her. And I needed her to understand that I hadn't forgotten any of those things. And why did we need to have that conversation? It was because it was the right timing, and it was an epic point in my life that things were going to change between us forever. But I also wanted her to know that I loved her and I was still her son. Now, to me, that was healthy. I'm not sure how my mom felt in that moment, but it was healthy, and it needed to be said. Um, a lot of
Yeah.
people in the counseling session will now make the trauma that they experienced as a child the source for cutting off mom, the source for cutting off dad, the source for breaking off, the reason for breaking off all kinds of relationships. Instead of resolving the issues, which is what I wanted to do, they dissolve relationships. So they dissolve them, and that
Yeah.
and that counseling is not biblical, and it's not healthy. It creates boundaries. It argues that the boundaries to prevent these people from being in your life are necessary, when in reality boundaries are to keep the good in. That's the whole
Yeah.
point of boundaries.
Yeah.
It's the negative out. So if you were to ask me about where counseling is going, counseling is so person centered, and it's all for this arbitrary subjective need for the person to feel good about themselves rather than to to feel good
Yeah.
because truth is lived out.
Yeah, that's this what Freud ends up building into the culture and into our psychology is a radical autonomy that needs community, but at the same time is destroyed by community. This is the
Exactly.
way he puts it in his book. And these a couple of little quotes here. It is a curious fact that human beings, incapable of living in individual isolation, nevertheless find the sacrifices that culture asks of them in order to make human coexistence possible a heavy load to bear. And then he goes on to say in another spot, it was precisely because of the perils with which nature threatens us that we got together in the first place and created culture, which is meant, among other things, to enable us to live together. Indeed, the main function of culture, the real reason for its existence, is to shield us against nature. So there it is. Culture, we need culture to shield us against nature, but that shielding is a burden because it doesn't allow us to embody our true nature. But our true nature is destructive, but we need culture to help us. But when it helps us, it destroys us. And what you said is so important because of this, the toxicity of self, the toxicity of culture, the radical autonomy and the isolation that creates. There is zero inroad for
Forgiveness.
reconciliation or for forgiveness.
And I
Forgiveness
would,
is not a value within that worldview. We see that in critical theories, critical race
yep,
theories. We see that in our politics. We see that's why Erica Kirk's speech was so powerful for so
exactly.
many. I don't know if you
Yeah,
saw this, but Tim Allen,
I did.
Toolman, voice of Buzz Lightyear, all that kind of stuff. He put out this thing. I have held the burden of unforgiveness against the man who killed his father for 60 years. He heard her say this. I saw that young man, I forgive you. And he's like, I was able to let it go
Yeah.
because we live in a Freudian toxic soup of mental conflict that we cannot forgive. We refuse, we don't have the capacity to forgive
Right.
in his worldview system. It does not exist, let alone is it a value. You can't forgive.
You
You
can't.
can't have reconciliation. And that is so tragic.
I would say the thing I took away from that conversation with my mom, it wasn't that I chose to forget what happened. I just chose to remember other parts more and make them more salient. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you ever
Yeah.
forget those things, but I chose to remember my mom for the person that she was, the good that she did for me, and I chose not to emphasize those other aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, that's a story in and of itself. And I think what
Yeah.
happens with people is that we're in self protection mode. We need to be protected from everything. We're we become so fragile in our mental health that we can't withstand the things that life presents. Life is hard. It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. Nothing
Mm-hmm.
is ever easy, even for the people who have more money than you and I can shake a stick at. Life is hard.
Yeah.
Life is hard.
I
And
tell my students every semester, I say, this is the truth, and you've got to live by this. Life will never be easier for you than it is right now. And if you don't come to grips with that, with a worldview that is able to overcome the hardships that you're facing now, you are certainly not going to face well the hardships that come down the road. And I'm not saying
exactly.
that because it's a downer. I'm saying that because just as life gets more complex, as you weave in relationships and maybe children, and the more relationships you have, the more complexities you get, and which means the more hardship you face. And if we can't deal with the small issues, and I don't mean small and unimportant. I mean, just while they're limited, they're few because our parents protect us from certain things. Our
Hmm.
social groups preserve us from that. But if we don't build a robust worldview that's able to overcome those things, it only gets harder. And
Yes.
that leads us to this last question. How will my life be judged? And I was thinking, really, I thought of this when we were talking pre-show, but our conversation now certainly crystallized this. I had it more as a question in pre-show, and I feel like I've answered it more as a statement. My question pre-show is Freud the father of cancel culture? And I think my answer to that would be yes. And
Hmm.
again, not because he authored it, but because his worldview, the way he approached the human psyche and culture, I think that's the only way to deal with the oppressors, the emotional oppressors, with the people who differ from us, that don't allow our inner desires and our suppressed longings to be fulfilled, we must cancel them because we can't reconcile. We have no hope of community for them. There's no judgment. There's no eternal punishment. There's only this sense of internal guilt consciousness, shame, and social isolation. That's our only hope. So the only punishment is psychological or social consequences. There's no cosmic. So we have to put the enemy in prison. We have to put the person into cancel their jobs. We have to do all those things because that in this moment is the only way for my desires to be validated, is to see the other person harmed.
And murder
That's
is
all
the
we're left
ultimate
with.
murder is the ultimate cancellation.
Yeah.
Right? It's the ultimate.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. I mean, I think that he is the father of that. I mean, because you have in one hand he tells you you need people, on the other hand he tells you that people are going to hurt you. The only way that you can actually live in that reality is if you only have people in your life who do good to you, right?
Yeah.
Or who do good for you, or who've never hurt you, or who've never frustrated you, or never
Which
caused
is nobody.
which is nobody.
I
Which
learned a
is
lesson young, Leroy, is the people you love the most will always hurt you the deepest. Not
that's
because they're the worst person, but
Mhm.
because you've trusted, because you've cared, because you've put some of yourself into them that if they violate that, it hurts, it cuts deeply.
Yeah,
So the only people that can hurt you, matter of fact, are the people you care about. The people that hate me can't really hurt me because I don't invest myself in them. So the only real hurts come from the people closest to you. And for Freud, the only way to solve that hurt is to isolate those people who care the most about you, to not forgive, but to harm them back, or to
exactly.
ostracize or isolate them, which
It's
again is intensely, insanely isolating, which
and
leads
here's
to
the
a
thing.
toxic self-aggrandizement.
Here's the thing. That's exactly the opposite of the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
God, who cannot be hurt by anyone, comes in the form of a child, needs to be taken care of, needs to be fed, needs to have his bottom wiped, is cared for, loves, goes to his own people who hurt him, who ultimately kill him. That is the gospel. That is the gospel lived out. Yet he still did it for the joy set before him. And we are most like him when we are willing to forgive those people who have hurt us. Forgiving doesn't mean trusting. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means living in the light of that hurt and being willing to remain in relationship to the extent that you can. This is why when Paul
Mm-hmm.
says, as long as it's up to me, I'm going to live peaceably with all men.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it's up to me, I'm going to live peaceably with all people. I'm going to try to be peaceable with all people. It's not
Mm-hmm.
my, and that means that when people hurt me, it doesn't mean that I immediately kick them out of my life. Absolutely not. I mean, I can just recount having been around people that have hurt me deeply, and it's always been people that you've extended part of yourself to, and saying to myself in that moment, I want to cut them off, but God, I
Mm-hmm.
want to cut them off, but I need to minister to that
Yeah.
person. I need to care about that person. And I'm not saying that I've always done that perfectly, because I haven't. But what I am saying is the more I get older and the more I mature and the more I want to become more Christ-like, the more I'm going to be open to help those people to the extent that I can, to
Mm-hmm.
the relationship that I can have. And let me just sum it up here. I remember talking to this lady who was having problems with her mom, and I said to her, keep the relationship in a place where it is safe for you to have that relationship, which may mean limiting the opportunities that you go over there to visit that your mom, limiting those times. And then when you go over there, the moment the conversation turns to something deeply harmful, saying, I'm going to check out. I'm not going to be involved in that conversation, because ultimately what you're hoping for is for that person to say, why do you remove yourself from these conversations? Or why do you separate yourself? Or why don't you come to see me as much as you used to? So that you can honestly say in that moment, I come to see you, Mom, because I love you and I care for you and I want to be in relationship with you. But I have to limit the time that I'm with you because you unintentionally or intentionally consistently hurt me. And I don't want to be hurt by you, but I also love you and want to be in relationship with you. So until you recognize that you're hurting me and give me an opportunity to explain to you how we can make this right, I have to limit. I don't want you out of my life. I love you. You're my mom. But I have to limit the amount of time that I'm going to be around you so that I can have a relationship with you. And when you begin to act that, what you're praying for and what you're hoping for is for that opportunity to explain why the relationship has somewhat changed. Not because you want to excise that person from your life, but because you want to resolve the issues in a way that not only respects your mom and not only respects your feelings and your need to be in that relationship, but one that is healthy and one that is biblical and honors the Lord. And too many people, like I said, they want to dissolve relationships rather than resolve them. And we're not wise enough, we're not man enough or woman enough in order to tell people how we really feel and then give them an opportunity to maintain that relationship in a healthy way.
Yeah. And I think that's a great closing reminder for how Christians need to take this away. What you said kind of reminds me a little bit of what Joshua had said earlier in the show, and parallels my sort of closing thought as well, is that what this sort of cultural toxicity, this self-centered toxicity that is generated through Freudian worldview thinking, not necessarily every idea he had, but that worldview that he creates generates this sort of unforgiving, unrelenting, conflict-centered reality that we live in that is always going to be under mental stress and duress, and there's no hope of escaping the spiral that he puts us into. The only solution is the cross of Jesus Christ, as you just pointed out, where he offers us forgiveness. While we were yet enemies, Christ died for us. He didn't do it because we're good people or because we're his friends or because we desired relationship, but because he is a good God who desired us because we were made B'Tselem Elohim in his image. And then once we are brought into relationship with God, despite our shortcomings, and we experience that forgiveness, we enter community that can offer that same forgiveness. So the church becomes the vehicle to solve this worldview dilemma that Freud has trapped us in. And only through the vehicle of the church, as the word of God manifests in our lives, can we really bring healing to these tragic issues and problems that we face. So Leroy, I don't think there's any way around some of these issues. There is only healing from these issues. And again, that points us always to the person of Jesus Christ. So brother, I just want to, for our sake of time, finish with those. I think your last thoughts were equally brilliant as they always are, and so insightful. I hope people, I'll probably clip some of that later for some video shorts on this, because I think the stories you've told and the way you've related that is so well done. So with that, keep in mind, there is so much more we could say about Freud and his impact on our culture. But for now, I want to encourage my brothers and sisters to go out, till the soil of this desperately weed-infested culture so that we can raise the roof on bad psychology and toxic relationships and toxic sort of self-awareness and self-consciousness. And I hope everyone will come back and join me in the next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to follow and rate the show on your favorite podcasting service. And if you want to participate with me in a subscribers only question and answer, sign up through my website, morethancake.org. Thank you, and go.